So you'd figure like 5 years into a system's life that the demand for it would have fallen off by now, but the Switch just keeps on going. And we had some recent sales information shared with us, and I'm to the point now where it's pretty obvious we're part currently of a historic generation for a console with its sales, and it's certainly something that none of us saw coming. Guys, if you enjoy these videos, make sure you hit that like button. Helps that a ton. And if you're new here to the Spawnwave channel, make sure you subscribe down below. So first off, let me go over here. This is the dedicated unit, video game unit sales, and we had this information updated this previous week when Nintendo shared the results of this most recent fiscal year that ended March 31st. So right now we're in their next fiscal year. That would be fiscal year 2023, and that will be running until the end of March 31st, 2023. Now we're going to come back to that because Nintendo did issue their forecast and how many Switch systems they believe they will sell by then, but we can see here 107.65 million units have sold for the Switch and 822 million units for software. Both those numbers are very impressive. Obviously, you see it next to the 3DS, that's 75 million, and less than half in terms of software for the Switch. And I mean, the Wii U, the poor Wii U, there it is with 103 million units of software, once again, less than the hardware for the Switch. But the two systems that people are really comparing it to right now, where the Wii, after it has passed that, it still needs to work up to that software number, but it seems pretty obvious it's going to get there. But the DS, 154 million units of hardware, 948 million units of software. This is all the way around Nintendo's best selling system, hardware and software. But I mean, look where the Switch is right now, 107 and then 822. It's coming up on it pretty quick. Now, we also did have some information shared with us this week when it comes to the NPD sales in the US. This being updated for last month, that would have been April. And we had an interesting statistic shared with us for the Switch in that in the US, the Switch has now passed the PlayStation 4 when it comes to overall units sold. Say the Switch did lead the month in unit sales, and the NPD says it has now passed the Sony's PlayStation 4 in terms of lifetime sales in the US. Basically, the way that the NPD tracks is through revenue or just dollars spent. But they do still keep tabs on the Switch when it comes to the number of systems sold, because the Switch does sell cheaper than the PS5 or the Xbox Series. Remember, there's a Switch Lite thrown in there at $200, and then the current Switch, $300, the Redbox one, then there's the OLED at $350. So there's a bit of a spread when it comes to the dollars generated from those sales versus a $300, a $400, or a $500 system on the other side with the Series S, X, digital PS5, and regular PlayStation 5. Now, it's still trailing the PS2, the Xbox 360, and the Wii. The 360 was actually very popular in the US, and so was the Wii. And obviously, the PS2 comes up in any sales conversation because it's the best-selling home console of all time. It's up there with the DS. So the DS being where it is as a handheld versus the PS2 as a console, I still look at the PS2 as being the most impressive system when it comes to its overall sales because, as we know, and we're seeing this effect with the Switch, households will tend to own multiples of handhelds. And the Switch, I mean, there's a Switch Lite thrown in there that I'm sure has been purchased many times by the same family. Now, we are at a very interesting point with the Switch in its life currently, and I think the next 2 years are really going to tell us if the Switch is going to make that run and become the best-selling system of all time. It's a very possible scenario, and actually likely, unless Nintendo kind of Nintendos and just veers off the path completely, just takes a massive left turn or something. But if we look at the Wii, it got off to a fast start. If you remember, the Wii was impossible to find when it first came out. It was for like 2 years. It was just the demand was super high, and eventually Nintendo got the production all figured out, and they did produce 26 million Wii systems, this during the 2009 fiscal year. Afterwards, though, it did continue to fall by about 5 million, and then eventually by like 2011, going to 2012, I mean, it was pretty much the Wii had tapered off completely. It did eventually kind of limp past the 100 million unit mark, whereas the Switch just crashed right through it. And we have heard talks that Nintendo could be doing a revision of some kind. Nintendo themselves didn't seem interested in commenting on if there is new hardware coming out this current fiscal year. I think right now with the chip shortage, even if Nintendo wanted to come out with a new system, they're still not 100% sure if they can, say, make the holiday deadline based on what we're seeing with part availability across the board. But right in this time period, fiscal year 2010, 2011, this is where Nintendo should have been able to adapt to the changing marketplace and come out with a Wii HD rather than try to move to the Wii U in late 2012. Clearly, that was not a great idea there. I think they could have extended the Wii's life, and rather than have this massive drop-off between this fiscal year and then 2012's fiscal year, they could have had a Wii HD and maybe extended it into 2013 potentially. A lot of it came down to the fact that there was heavy adoption when it came to HDMI equipped sets, and we even saw like the 360, of course, start to do things like add the HDMI port with that Elite a few years prior, and the PS3 had it from the start, but it was very clear people were moving up to those kind of TVs, and the Wii just wasn't really set up for it. The best you were going to do then was get component cables for it, or find one of those like off-brand third-party HDMI adapters. Which finally brings me to this list here. It's the best-selling consoles of all time. The PS2 obviously at the top, 155 million. The DS right behind it, 154 million. The PS2 and the DS is a time period that I didn't think we'd ever be able to replicate with another system. Certainly the PS2 when it comes to home consoles, because even now, Sony, the PS4 was a roaring success for them. The Xbox One just never competed. It was always well behind it. But even that seems to be kind of capping off at like 117 or 118 million. And like I said, they just ran away with it. Reminds me very much of the PlayStation 2 when that just completely ran away with the generation. And it had two competing systems. Nintendo likes to be off on their own, like with the Wii U and all of this, but like the GameCube and the Xbox were like, hey, we're powerful. We have this dedicated lineup of games. Microsoft's making all these deals, throwing money around. But Sony came out with the PS2 when Sega was exiting, and they had just accrued a ton of third-party support from the previous generation when they broke onto the scene with that PlayStation, showing that, yes, they could easily push around Nintendo in that home console market. But the PS2 also played DVDs, and there are a lot of people who bought a PlayStation 2 just for the DVD aspect. I mean, that was a big shift in multimedia, going from VHS tapes to DVDs, and for a lot of people, hey, just pick up a PS2 and you're covered. The DS being the other one that I didn't think we'd ever replicate, and technically the Switch covers both bases, right? Whether it's home console or a portable system. And the DS came about when cell phones weren't like completely there with how smartphones are now, where basically everyone has one and you can just take that out of your pocket. If you have to kill like 10 or 15 minutes with a slew of free-to-play games you can just grab off the App Store in like a couple of seconds. At that time, it was much more of a common thing to walk around with a DS basically everywhere, and it was set up with that in mind, not like the PSP, which was much more delicate, and you were a bit more concerned about it getting damaged, even putting it in your bag. The DS, it was clamshell, folded closed, and it didn't have like the load times or anything. It was very quick. Pick up and play for a couple of minutes, close it, and just put it away, and you're off and running. So to see the Switch here, 107.65 million, a little less than 10 million behind the PlayStation 4. That's overall worldwide. While it has passed it in the US, easily passed it in Japan, still places like Europe, the PlayStation 4, very popular there. But Nintendo has projected 21 million Switch systems to sell in this current fiscal year, which means by the end of March 2023, we would see the Switch running up to about 130 million units, which would put it above the PlayStation 4, the Game Boy, and the Game Boy Color. And I mean, right behind the DS and the PlayStation 2. They'd be like one big fiscal year, or maybe two standard fiscal years, away from passing both of those systems and becoming the best-selling console handheld hybrid of all time. And this is where it becomes very important for how Nintendo approaches the next 2 years. Are they indeed going to do some sort of revision to continue the demand for this device? Because sometimes they'll just announce a new color for the Switch Lite and it'll sell out. Like, it's that easy for them. Imagine if they had a revision of some kind that was backwards compatible, still played all the same games. They could put it under the Switch umbrella, and it was like the Switch 4K. And people roll their eyes at that because it's been talked about for so long. But that's a way to just inject more demand and hype into a system and keep rolling at like this 18, 20 million unit selling for each fiscal year going forward. And that might also allow them to extend the generation a bit longer so that they could actually run up to some crazy number, 170, 180 million. I mean, at that point, anything's possible. Now, the way that that could actually hurt them is if Nintendo just completely Nintendo's out, takes a left turn out of nowhere, and it's a brand new generation with a clean break. Like, I never want to count Nintendo out because they'll do some weird stuff sometimes. That to me just sounds really far-fetched. I think they understand that they have brought in that general audience that they had been able to capture with the Wii once again, because this concept is so different from what everyone else around them is doing, that being that hybrid model, that you just build on that hybrid model. You make it better, and these people will then follow you along with their Nintendo accounts and the Nintendo subscription service they have now, and hopefully the cartridges and games that you've bought that will still work on this new system. Now, I'm sure you might be wondering, why does any of this actually matter? And really, at the end of the day, we're just seeing a corporation make a ton of money and find success with this new product that they introduced back in 2017. But in the grand scheme of things, in video game history, I think this is one of those generations that we'll look back on similar to how we look back on the PS2 and the DS in like 10 or 15 years. Like, remember when the Switch exploded and sold 170 million some odds? No one's ever going to do that again, and who knows, maybe it will happen at some point, but just kind of bringing perspective and just acknowledgement with where we are in this generation and how it appears to be shaping up to be a historic one. But I was looking back on it, and even back in 2017, I did not think that the Switch would have a shot at becoming the best selling system of all time. After like the first year or two, people were like, "Oh, I think that might be able to pass the Wii if they keep this rolling along." But like I said, Nintendo makes some weird decisions sometimes. Here, though, not so much. They've kind of just rolled along with what they've found here to be successful, and they have released good games for the most part across the board each and every year, and they brought Pokemon to the console side of things. That certainly had a pretty good effect on their sales. And I saw some people after I tweeted it out, they're like, "Oh, I knew it could become the best-selling system of all time." I don't believe you. How could you say that after the Wii U? You might think, oh, yeah, you know what, the Switch, it's interesting, it's different, it'll sell more than the Wii U, which I would hope so. But like, I saw some people, I remember when it was first coming out, 60, 70 million. And I'm like, yeah, that's okay. I could see that. That would put them back on track. The potential for 160 or 170 million? No, I don't believe anyone who says they saw that one coming. But hey, let me know down in the comments what you guys think about this one. Interesting stuff from Nintendo, and I am extremely curious to see where they take things over the next couple of years, especially since you're starting to see the questions pop up more and more from investors around next generation and what's next for Nintendo. Because if anyone's going to be looking forward into the future, it's certainly the investors that are going to keep asking those questions. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.